So, in case you missed it, Atlas just released Persona 4 Golden on Steam. It's a great game and you should absolutely play it, but this isn't a review for that game. No, rather I want to talk about something else. As soon as the release of Persona 4 was even rumored, and doubly so after the release, I instantly saw all kinds of takes on Twitter. People grateful that the game was leaving the one system that it was on. People saying that said system was bad and that now that it lost the one good exclusive it had, it was now properly dead. And that system is the PlayStation Vita. I love the Vita. It's a fascinating if flawed piece of hardware, and in the hundreds of hours that I've spent playing mine, I've been introduced to some of my favorite games of all time. Heck, I even call it one of my favorite systems of all time, or at least my favorite handheld, which puts it against some pretty stiff competition. It's a great system, but it did fail, and because of that people think that it's bad. No, the Vita was good. You guys are just mean. Alright, I said the line. First things first, man, what a piece of hardware the Vita is. In a similar way to how the PSP was essentially a portable PlayStation 2, the Vita is basically a portable PlayStation 3. Dual analog sticks, they aren't the greatest that I've ever used, but it's a major step up from the pad of the PSP, and especially the nub of the new 3DS. Not only that, we have not one but two touchscreens on the front and the back. The back one's a bit unruly, you have to get used somewhere to put your hand so that you don't accidentally touch it, and it isn't used that much anyways, but the front one is, and it works really well. It's great for games like visual novels and ports of PC games that made use of the mouse. And the graphics obviously don't make the system, but man, it's still really impressive what the Vita could do as a dedicated handheld, easily matching the presentation of console games. And the screen really complements that. Later models of the Vita would use a standard LCD screen, but the first generation used an OLED, and the colors on this thing are really sharp. But of course, hardware means nothing without games to play, and this is the big sticking point. Everyone says that the Vita has no games, but I'm fairly certain most people saying that have never really looked at a list to see what games it has. Persona 4 Golden's the big one, the coveted killer app for all these years. But speaking of Persona, all three of the dancing games are available to play for some really hype rhythm game tunes. Oh, and the rhythm games. All three of the HD Project Diva games are available on the Vita, and those games are phenomenal. I have a splitter now, so stay tuned for that. It's also a hotspot for all the best visual novels. The Vita is where I first played Steins Gate, and even as recently as this year, it's where I played Chaos Child, and those are all great. Danganronpa made its Western debut here as well, and that trilogy is some of the wackiest murder mysteries I've ever seen. And the Zero Escape trilogy. Man, the Zero Escape trilogy. These are some of my favorite stories in all of media, period. And the Vita is the best way to experience these portably, for the most part. Deathmark is an interesting horror visual novel that I really need to get around to finishing. Odin Sphere is a fantastic action RPG. Tearaway is a very interesting showcase of all the system's gimmicks. Gravity Rush is an amazingly charming adventure that actually makes really good use of the system's gyroscope. And the Vita is also a great place to play a lot of Falcom's games. And that's to say nothing of the games I haven't even played. Stuff like Code Realize, Valhalla, Hyperdimension Neptunia, House and Fata Morgana, Uncharted Golden Abyss, Soul Sacrifice, Freedom Wars, Muramasa, Utawara Mono, and just all kinds of games. And those are just the Vita games proper. The catalog of older classics that you can play are also a sight to behold. The PS1 Classics line from the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation Portable also make a return on the Vita, and while there's some noteworthy exclusions, stuff like the Crash games and the Spyro games, you can still play a large chunk of the PlayStation 1's best games. This is where I first played the Mega Man Legends games, and yeah, I can see why these are so fondly remembered. Symphony of the Night is still one of the best Metroidvania games, and that's here too. All the mainline PS1 Resident Evils are here, and so are all the PlayStation 1 Tomb Raider games. And Square's offerings too. The PlayStation 1 Final Fantasies are all here and accounted for, as well as Tactics. But for my money, the best PS1 classic I played has to be Parasite Eve, a fascinating RPG that combines the active time battle system with a horror aesthetic that makes a truly one-of-a-kind experience. If we can get a remake of this in the style of Final Fantasy VII, that would be the greatest, but that's probably a talk better suited for another time. But wait, there's more. All the PlayStation Portable games that were available digitally are also available on the Vita, bringing many of those systems highlights over as well. The loss of some of Square Enix's games like Crisis Core and Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep are upsetting, but the great remakes of Final Fantasies 3 and 4 more than make up for it. This also means that you can play the first 11 mainline Final Fantasy games on one system. And hey, some of the spin-offs like Dissidia are here too to sweeten the deal even more. Speaking of RPGs, Persona 1, Persona 2 Innocent Sin, and 3 Portable are present as well, which alongside the PlayStation 1 version of Eternal Punishment, makes the Vita the most robust Persona machine even now. Ape Escape on the Loose is an interesting take on one of the PlayStation 1's strangest and best games. The apologist in me is pleased to say that you can play Corpse Party and Book of Shadows here, and you can play Dracula X Chronicles, Fate Extra, Power Stone, and so much more. Obviously, you need to have an interest in Japanese games, but hey, if that's your thing, there's all kinds of games to love here. Yet, despite this lineup, the Vita still failed. How is that even possible? Well, it boils down to two main things. Let's start small. Very small. These are the memory cards for the Vita. They may look like microSD cards, but no, they're proprietary PlayStation Vita cards. These were made to circumvent hacking, which is fair, but the problem with proprietary cards is that they can only be manufactured and sold by Sony, and can only be used on the PlayStation Vita. This means that Sony gets control of the price, and guess what? These cards are very expensive. 64GB cards tend to go for around $100, and yeah, I think you can see the problem there. If you think you can get away without getting a memory card, well, you can do a bit on the slim models, but on the original model, which is what I have, you're out of luck. This thing has no internal storage, like at all. That means even if you aren't interested in downloading games, you still have to shell out cash for a memory card to keep your save data. The later models get it a bit better with 1GB of internal storage, but that's only useful if you're going all physical, and because of patches and things of the sort, that'll still only get you so far. Stuff like Chaos Child will eat up about half of that. And you really want to get stuff digitally too. The physical only locks you out of all the PlayStation 1 and PSP games, and a number of the Vita's downloadable titles. And since a lot of these can be really big, most smaller cards will fill up faster than you think. That means you either have to cut your losses and go all physical, limiting the amount of games you can get significantly, or shell out the cash for a memory card that's actually worth something. But no, the memory cards are second to a much bigger problem, and sharp-eyed viewers probably already caught on to it long ago. The sad reality is that while the Vita has all kinds of good games on it, almost nothing worth playing on it is exclusive to the system. All those PlayStation 1 and PSP games, they're all from just that, the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation Portable. The Project Diva games, they were all released on PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. Same with all those visual novels I talked about. Tearaway was remade for PlayStation 4, Gravity Rush was straight ported, and even the killer app, Persona 4 Golden, in addition to just being a remake of a game you can get on PlayStation 2, is also on PC now. The Vita has games worth playing on it, and that's obvious from the fact that they're available to play on other systems. But because of that, there's no real reason to get a Vita these days besides portability. Perhaps this fate could have been avoided. If the Vita had a stronger launch lineup and were more consistent with third-party support, we'd have seen more games on it. If the memory cards weren't so freaking expensive, we would have seen more digital sales. If Sony had given more incentive and opportunities for cross-buying and cross-saving, we could have had a beautiful combination of portable and console gaming, being able to play your games on the big screen and continuing it on the go. And we know that there's a market for this, because that's exactly what the Nintendo Switch is doing right now. Really, the Vita was just a victim of bad circumstances. It was released at a bad time with a bad price, in a period where dedicated handhelds were starting to head on the way out. But on a technical level, it's a phenomenal swan song for the dedicated handheld market. Most of its games ended up being on PlayStation 4, but make no mistake, the Vita was running those games, and they were running them really well. As recently as last year, games like Steins Gate Elite, Zonky Zero, and Catherine Full Body were seeing release on the Vita running just as well as their console counterparts, and that impresses me even now. With the last big release of Utawara Mono Prelude, and the port of Persona 4 Golden to PC, it's safe to say that the Vita's run is officially over. But Vita means life, and it was a life well lived. A life of bringing the best of Sony's legacy under one console. One of pushing technical boundaries to stay on the level of the home consoles right up to the very end. A life that was flawed, a life that in the grand scheme of things failed, but a life that deserves to be looked back on fondly for what it got right. The Vita was a good system, and I hope I did a good job showing you that. So until next time, see ya.